Governor Greg Abbott is pausing new data center approvals in Texas as the state reviews hundreds of proposed projects over concerns about the power grid. Now, President Trump is weighing in, calling Abbott's move a, quote, mistake. For more, let's bring in Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Governor, it is so great to see you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. So you've raised concern about the power grid in this AI fight. The president took a swipe at your decision. In his mind, it may put the world's #1 data center market in the slow lane. Here's what he said. I want to get your reaction.
For Texas to say no to data centers is a mistake in the sense that it could be bigger than oil. I mean, data centers could be bigger than oil. You have the Texas oil, and there are a lot of communities that want them, but more importantly, and bad for us, there are a lot of countries that want them. And if we turn off on data centers, or we turn off on AI.
Is the president wrong, or does he fundamentally misunderstand something about your position?
Well, Jackie, I need to provide the full context of the decision, and so I can clarify the entire situation, and that is what I did is I pressed pause on any new data center approval in the state of Texas, and then I established guidelines and guardrails for all data centers to comply with. One is data centers must not take water that is needed by rural communities. They must not take power that's needed by the Texas power grid. They must lower the cost of electricity for consumers, and they must not disturb neighborhoods or rural communities. And those guidelines and guardrails have now been fully applied to all data centers across the state of Texas. Then, in addition to that, one of the triggers for putting the pause in place, and that is that the state power grid, known as ERCOT, they were receiving requests for 5 times more power than the state power grid was able to deliver. If the state power grid were to accept all of those applications, obviously it would compromise our ability to maintain a stable and reliable grid. Hence, the need for investigation. And then it was the data centers themselves that were part of the reason why the investigation was needed, and that is because a Texas state agency requested all current and future applicants for power grid ability in the state of Texas to provide information about how much power they were either using or were going to be using over the next 5 years, and less than 10% of those data centers actually responded to that information. So the power grid in the state of Texas was dealing with less than 10% of the information that it needed to make determinations on the power grid applicants. It'd be like giving you a 100-piece puzzle and say, listen, you got to solve this puzzle with only 9 pieces. Obviously, that's not enough to solve the puzzle, and it's certainly not enough for the power grid in the state of Texas to make fully informed decisions about these data centers that are trying to be taking power from the Texas power grid.
Yeah, this industry obviously grew very fast and was not as much of a hot-button issue even just a few years ago. So always an open question about how quickly you can put safeguards in place, especially when you're dealing with something like AI. I want to get to something else, though. This surrogacy story that's gripped a lot of headlines. There was a surrogate, McKenna West. She came to Texas after she said she was pressured to terminate her pregnancy. There's her baby diagnosed with a severe heart defect. The biological parents, she says, pressured her to terminate the pregnancy. The Attorney General, Ken Paxton, stepped in. The Texas courts made sure that she got life-saving treatment. And now Paxton is making it part of his Senate campaign against James Tellerico. Listen to this.
But our goal was just to save the baby, make sure that the baby had the opportunity to get life-sustaining treatment, which everybody deserves, no matter what your age is, and that's what we fought for, and that's what we got. I think he's afraid to comment because if he says the right thing, it would offend a lot of his liberal Democrats. If he says the wrong thing, then which is opposing what we did, was just make sure this baby could live, then most of Texas is not going to like his answer.
Putting the politics of this question aside, you know, there is the broader concern that this sheds light on about who should have the ultimate authority in a decision like this. And I want to get your answer. Do you think it should be the woman carrying the baby, the biological parents who executed a contract, or the state? I mean, how do you make a decision like that in the future?
Well, listen, part of it is determined by the state in which the person, the woman carrying the baby, is in at the time that she is pregnant, at the time that she would give birth. Texas is the most pro-life state in the United States of America. We understand the concept that for a child to have a chance in life, that child must first have a chance at life. And so we protect the life of the baby while the mother is carrying it and at the time of birth and in the early days of its life to make sure it's going to be able to receive all medical treatment that is necessary. And that is exactly what's happened to baby Gabriel here in the state of Texas.
Okay. I also want to get your take on this other news. You stopped down the installation of some planned Islamic foot washing stations at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. You wrote to Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, these facilities appear designed to single out one subset of the population for special treatment based on religion. I'm unaware of either airport installing standalone facilities to meet the particular needs of the many other religious groups represented across Texas. That is illegal. Both airports are government-owned facilities. Both the federal and state constitutions prohibit the government from facilitating this kind of discrimination. You're referencing George Bush International Airport as the other airport under discussion here, and that airport, IAH, already has one of these foot washing stations. So I want to ask you, are you advocating that that existing foot washing station get pulled out?
So both for any proposed or any existing facilities like that are simply unconstitutional and illegal. Let me explain what I did here as well as what I've done before, and that is any Muslim-only location like this or any Muslim-only event in the state of Texas, we've shut down. You cannot have a Muslim-only washing station in an airport. You can, before that, shut down a Muslim-only event in Grand Prairie, a Muslim-only event at school districts in various regions across the state of Texas, because that is very simply illegal. One factor weighing in here with the airport, and that is there are two different parts of an airport, one of which is governed by our local cities, the other which is governed by the federal government here by Secretary Duffy. If it is before you get to the TSA check-in, that's governed by the city, and the state of Texas is going to crack down and eliminate funding for that city if they don't comply with the standard that I've articulated. Once a passenger gets inside the TSA checkpoint, that is then governed by the federal government and is subject to Secretary Duffy to make sure that they too crack down on and eliminate these washing centers because they are in violation of the United States Constitution.
Okay. You've argued also that government neutrality toward religion shouldn't mean eliminating religious expression. That was an argument that you made during the Ten Commandments in Classrooms debate. Is there an argument here that applies to that? And I ask because there's a conservative activist, Ryan Fournier, who wrote in the New York Post, or was quoted rather, this isn't about pushing an ideology, it's basic airport management. People washing their feet in standard bathroom sinks creates soaked, slippery floors and breaks the counters. Low-level wudu basins keep the restrooms dry and safe for everyone. The comparison being made is that, the Ten Commandments, you said, were not only religious but historical. It wasn't a religious-only argument. Is there a similar argument that these critics are raising now that's valid, or would you say that it's not?
So you're talking apples and oranges. I'll walk through it very quickly. If there are special facilities allowed for those who are Muslims, there must also be special facilities allowed for Christians, for Jews, and literally dozens, if not hundreds, of other religious faiths of people who are coming through our airports, and that simply is unfeasible. Second, let's go back. To be clear, I personally argued the Ten Commandments case of a monument on the Texas Capitol grounds to the United States Supreme Court and won by making clear that the Ten Commandments were part of the legal system and traditions of the state of Texas from our beginning to who we are today. And we are just teaching components of what made Texas history what it is by the Ten Commandments, such as thou shalt not kill and other principles like that, whereas these other religious faiths, they don't have the same application over the course of the history of the state of Texas, and hence do not need to be recognized either in our schools or on the Texas Capitol ground like other religions.
Okay, we will continue to follow it. Governor Greg Abbott, thank you very much for talking with us on the Sunday briefing, sir. Great to see you. Thank you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.